China is facing a disaster. Not in a few decades, not even a few years. It's happening right now. For decades, we've heard the same story. China, the unstoppable economic giant. Sky-high growth, a manufacturing powerhouse. The future of the global economy. But that story is no longer true. Behind the scenes, a very different China is emerging. One filled with ghost cities, collapsing industries, massive debt, and a shrinking, frustrated population. This isn't just an economic slowdown, it's a collapse in motion. And what happens next will affect every country on Earth, including yours. Stick around, because once you understand what's really going on inside China, you'll realize the global fallout has already begun. Let's start with China's most important economic engine, real estate. For years, buying property was the number one way to build wealth in China. Apartments weren't just homes, they were investments, safety nets, status symbols. But now, there are over $13 trillion worth of unsold apartments. Entire cities, built for millions, sit empty. Major developers like Evergrande have defaulted on their loans, and millions of Chinese families are refusing to pay mortgages on homes that don't exist yet. Protests are breaking out. Trust is crumbling. And the real estate engine that once powered China's growth is now pulling it into the ground. Since 2008, China has added $45 trillion in debt, more than the US and Europe combined during the same period. Why? Because growth in China wasn't always organic. It was borrowed. Local governments and companies borrowed endlessly to build housing, roads, factories, whether they were needed or not. It created jobs and GDP on paper, but also massive waste. Now, many of those projects produce no income, and the debt is coming due. This isn't normal debt. It's a ticking time bomb. Local governments across China are in deep financial trouble. Many relied on land sales to developers to pay their bills. But with the real estate market crashing, that revenue has vanished. Some regions have turned to extreme measures, paying civil servants in food instead of cash. Others have stopped paying salaries altogether. Social services are being slashed. Hospitals can't afford new equipment. Schools are underfunded. And the people are getting angry. China's banks are in trouble, and the public knows it. In rural areas, bank runs have already begun. People trying to withdraw their life savings only to be told their money is frozen. In one province, the government even used COVID health codes to block protesters from traveling to their banks. Officially, everything's fine. But unofficially, China's banks may be hiding hundreds of billions in bad loans, enough to threaten the entire financial system. When people lose trust in banks, the system breaks. In 2024, China's population shrank by 1.39 million people. That's not a blip. It's the start of a collapse. The birth rate has fallen to historic lows, just 6.39 births per 1,000 people. That's lower than Japan, lower than South Korea. Why? The one-child policy left behind a generation with no siblings, no savings, and rising costs. Young couples don't want or can't afford children. And the future? The UN expects China's population to drop by half before the end of the century. A country can't stay a superpower if it runs out of people. China's working-age population peaked in 2014. It's been shrinking ever since. By 2050, the country will lose over 200 million workers. At the same time, the elderly population is soaring. Economists call this getting old before getting rich. It's a demographic trap, and China is stuck in it. China's youth unemployment has reached crisis levels. Over 1 in 5 young people can't find a job. And when the numbers got too embarrassing, the government just stopped publishing the data. A new term has emerged on Chinese social media: full-time children, young adults living at home, unemployed, with no prospects. A lost generation, full of frustration and despair. And history shows us, when you have millions of idle, angry youth, revolutions follow. China's status as the world's factory is no longer guaranteed. Big companies like Apple, Nike, and Samsung are shifting manufacturing to India, Vietnam, and Mexico. US imports from China have dropped over 20% in just a few years. Foreign investment into China has collapsed by 80%. Why? Rising labor costs, political risk, tariffs, supply chain shocks. And once factories leave, they don't come back. China's tech industry was once seen as the next Silicon Valley, but then the crackdown came. Jack Ma disappeared. Tech IPOs were canceled. Gaming and AI industries were hit with strict regulations. In just 2 years, $1.5 trillion in value was wiped out. And with US chip bans, China's technological progress is slowing fast. The dream of dominating tech, fading. China has 20% of the world's people, but just 7% of its freshwater, and most of it is polluted or disappearing. The Yellow River is drying up, groundwater is toxic, the North China Plain, home to hundreds of millions, faces severe water shortages. This isn't decades away. It's already here. China imports over $140 billion in food each year. It's the world's largest soybean importer. That means any disruption, war, sanctions, climate shocks, could trigger massive food shortages. Throughout history, famines have toppled dynasties in China. Beijing knows that, and they're worried. China imports over 70% of its oil, much of it passing through the South China Sea. In a conflict or blockade, those energy flows could be cut off within weeks. And despite global climate promises, China is still addicted to coal. It's an unstable, risky mix for a modern economy. Crime and unrest are rising fast. Labor protests are up. Wage theft is common. Rural banks are failing. And here's the real red flag. China now spends more on internal security than on its military. That means the government sees its own people as the greatest. Belt and Road Initiative was meant to expand its influence through loans and infrastructure, but many countries can't repay. Sri Lanka defaulted. Kenya's debt is ballooning. China is seizing ports and assets, but at the cost of global backlash. What started as a soft power strategy is turning into a diplomatic disaster. The US now has tariffs on 66% of Chinese goods. Europe is cracking down on Chinese EVs and solar panels. India, Vietnam, and others are taking China's place in global trade. The message is clear. The world is decoupling from China, and fast. From an economic miracle to a system on the edge of collapse. This isn't just about China. It's about what happens to the global economy, global security, and your future when the world's second largest superpower begins to fall. If you think this won't affect you, you're not paying attention. Because when China breaks, it could break the world with it. If this opened your eyes, share it. The world needs to understand what's happening. Subscribe and stay tuned for our next deep dive, how China's collapse could trigger WWIII.